Hi y'all, this is going to be period 4, the next kind of unit. We're going to be 1800 to 1848, so it is essentially the revolution of 1800, the election of Jefferson, all the way to basically the lead up to the Civil War, the Mexican-American War, and then like the breakdown of until the Civil War. So this is the revolution of 1800 to the Mexican-American War. The way we're going to do this unit is I'm basically going to be teaching the DBQ and teaching the unit through the DBQ. So you're going to want to watch these lectures to help explain the DBQs. You're going to get 4 DBQs throughout the unit, and then at the end I will choose one at random. So you're just going to have to be prepared for all of them. So we're going to start out with a DBQ, which was the Revolution of 1800 revolutionary? I know we've done a lot of these types of questions, but this gets to this idea of like what changed when Jefferson was elected. So the way that DBQs are scored are on several things. So you have 1 point for a thesis, 1 point for context, 1 point for an outside fact, another point if you use 3 documents, and another point if you use 6 documents. So like, you get basically 2 points for using 6 documents. You have to analyze 3 documents, and then there's kind of this, what I call the sparkle magic point for complexity. So it is a 7-point rubric, and you just basically have to do all of these things to get 100%. So the opening, if I was, I did a lot of this was a problem. Anyway, in the opening, what I would usually kind of suggest is that you do some sort of contextualization and then your thesis. Your contextualization is going to be your background information, what happened before the prompt. So this prompt starts in 1800. Your context is going to be kind of like building into 1800, especially if you're doing a question of how revolutionary are the presidencies of Jefferson and Madison. Your contextualization is going to be what was it like before. So, think about that. Then you're going to have your body paragraphs, probably at least 2. You could aim for 3. And these are going to be the things that are going to support your thesis. Group your documents according to the topics for your body paragraphs. So the reason why I say probably you want 3 is because if you have to use 6 documents, you can do 2 documents per paragraph. If you are only doing 2 paragraphs, you have to do 3 documents per paragraph. Either one is fine, just as long as you get it done. And just make sure you're proving your thesis. You're going to want to start with a claim and prove your thesis. Then you do not need a conclusion. Now, I say you don't need a conclusion, but you do need to make your points. So if you have enough time as you're writing your DBQ, what I say is try to make sure you're using that last conclusion to get your points. So if you don't think your thesis is very good, if it doesn't answer the question, write your thesis in the conclusion. You can still get your points if you do that. If you still have time, try for your complexity in your conclusion. So these are the general tips. We'll be going over it a lot, but just to kind of get started. So let's go over context, right? So the DBQ that you have first starts with 1800. So if you're thinking of context, you want to talk about what happened before 1800. Well, we just talked about this, right? We can bring in things like Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was very concerned with individual rights. I think probably the easiest thing to do, though, for context is to talk about Washington's, presidency and really Hamilton's plan. Because this is where, the root of all the division. So Hamilton, remember, made his plan. He wanted to support manufacturing. He had a national bank. He had a tariff and an excise tax. And he was expanding the power of the federal government. But what Jefferson wanted is he was against Hamilton's plan. He wanted an agrarian public or farming. He wanted strict constructionism or very limited government. And he wanted to reduce the national debt. He wanted to support the French. He wanted states' rights. And so Jefferson kind of stood for everything that Hamilton was against, I guess. So the other thing immediately before Jefferson takes office or is elected in 1800 is the Alien and Sedition Act. If you remember, John Adams was almost going to war with France, you have people like Jefferson just going after John Adams like hard. And John Adams passes this act that basically makes it illegal to speak out against the government. Now, Jefferson is like, this is unconstitutional. It goes against the First Amendment. He's going to write the Kentucky and Virginia resolves, which basically say that states do not have to follow unconstitutional laws. So, things are so heated that in Congress, people are beating each other up with, I don't know, fire tongs. This is a Republican, Matthew Lyon, with with the fireplace tongs, and I think Griswold attacked with his cane. So anyway, he's a Federalist. Things are getting bad. We don't have to watch Hamilton, but if you wanted to, the election of 1800 is considered a revolution of 1800. So in 1796, Adams is going to win with 51% of the vote. But if you can see, more and more people are starting to become Democratic Republican. More people are moving out west. There is less power. I think New York is really the big state as it goes to Democratic Republicans. And Jefferson is going to win handily in the election of 1800. Now, the election of 1800 is weird because Jefferson... All right, so in 1796, Jefferson was Adams's vice president because he was the runner-up, which is how the original Constitution was supposed to go. In 1800, the Democratic Republicans realized that they could, the electors, if they went in, they could vote for Jefferson and Burr would be the runner-up. Now, one person was supposed to throw the election to Jefferson, but they forgot to do it. So anyway, Burr and Jefferson, who are both Democratic Republicans, end up in a tie, and it has to go to the House of Representatives to decide who the president is going to be. Now, the House of Representatives was Federalist, and they got to decide if Jefferson or Burr was going to be president. Now, they hate both of them. They like Adams, but Adams isn't a choice. So at first, a lot of the people in the House who were Federalists were like, well, you know what? We could really screw Jefferson over if we put Burr into office. Now, Hamilton is going to step in, and he's going to say, listen, I have my problems with Jefferson, but he's not crazy. Burr is crazy. Do not vote for Burr. So Hamilton actually convinces the House to support Jefferson in this kind of crazy election. We are going to make an amendment that changes how we elect the president. But anyway, because Hamilton supports Jefferson, claims that Burr is crazy, this is a long-standing beef that they have that goes way back to New York politics and other things. It's another sort of nail in the coffin for Hamilton in what is eventually going to be when Burr duels with Hamilton and kills him. So, there is a lot of problems with this election, and that mostly has to do with how we were electing vice presidents, and that is going to get solved later. Another weird thing is that after the election of 1800, there is a time that's called the lame duck period where John Adams is still in office. And John Adams is honestly, afraid of what's going to happen to the country when Jefferson takes office. So John Adams is trying to think of ways to essentially protect the Federalist, government. And so what he does is he passes this Judiciary Act of 1801. And in his last days of office, he essentially tries to pack the courts with Federalist judges. These last-minute appointment of judges, they are literally up until midnight, the day that Jefferson is coming in, and, trying to pack the courts with these Federalist judges. Now, Jefferson is going to appeal or repeal this act because he doesn't like it, but one of the people he is going to appoint is going to be Chief Justice John Marshall. He's a loose constructionist. He supports the Federalist causes. He supports separation of powers. And what he wants to do is make the Supreme Court a co-equal branch of the government. And it wasn't really the case before John Marshall. And this is all going to come down to Mulberry versus Madison. In Mulberry versus Madison, there are these midnight judges, right? We just talked about them. Adams packs the courts. Now, when Jefferson comes into the White House or into the offices, there is literally a letter sitting on a desk that if it was delivered, another judge was going to get a judgeship. So essentially, Madison, who is Secretary of State, walks in. There is an undelivered letter on his desk, and if he puts it, in the mail, Mulberry, a Federalist judge, is going to get this appointment, right? So Madison is like, I'm not going to deliver the letter, right? You guys were trying to pack the courts. I'm not going to deliver this. And so Mulberry knows that this letter exists, and what he does is he goes to the court and he says, you guys have to make Madison give me the letter, right? And that's called a writ of mandamus. You have to demand that Madison give me the letter. So this Federalist judge is going to the Supreme Court, trying to make the Supreme Court make Madison deliver the letter. Now, the decision is that it is illegal, that this writ of mandamus is illegal. Now, it is the first time the Supreme Court decides that something is unconstitutional, and so there's a couple of weird things about this. He is a Federalist, right? And so what's weird about this is that he, anyway, he was guided by the Constitution, not always by Federalists. I'm just going to go this. Anyway, if you think about Mulberry versus Madison, just remember judicial review. It is a very confusing case, but essentially, what John Marshall does is he decides a law is unconstitutional, and this is a major power. It is judicial review. When I say Mulberry versus Madison, you think judicial review. You really can't go wrong because it's what they always ask. And so because the Supreme Court decides that they have the power to review a law, this gives the courts the power to review a law, and it gives the courts an ability to check and to become a co-equal branch of government. So this is a big case. You need to know Mulberry versus Madison. It is huge. All right, so all of that is really background information because it is before Jefferson comes into office. So some of it is going to be context as well, but anyway, what I would probably do as my context is Hamilton and all of that stuff that happened before the election of 1800. So you have another point for thesis. It has to be defensible, and it cannot just restate the question. So it can be in your conclusion. So the question is, to what extent was the Revolution of 1800 revolutionary during the presidencies of Jefferson and Madison? Right? So to what extent, in order to answer this question, you have to say how much. Did it totally change? Did it change in some ways? Consider the promises of what Jefferson was thinking about before he was elected. Did he stick to his strict constructionism? Did he promote an agrarian society? Did he overturn Hamilton's plan? Did he limit the power of the federal government? Did he stop things like the Sedition Act? Did he change U.S. foreign policy? So these would be examples of a revolution. So as we're going through, this is it. We talked about the weirdness of the election of 1800. Burr, after he, gets in all this stuff with Hamilton and he, shoots him in a illegal duel, Burr is vice president, and then he ends up basically going on the lam, running to New Orleans and doing a plot to take over the United States. I don't know, it's all very weird. Anyway, he escapes to England. Jefferson's inauguration is really where we're going to start in the kind of framework of the DBQ. So you have this revolution of 1800. This is the first peaceful transfer of power. So you have the Federalists handing over power to Jefferson peacefully. And this is a huge thing for our, government. And, he basically says in his platform that we are going to, support peace. We're going to have friendship with the other nations. We are going to honest payment of debts. We're going to encourage, agriculture. It's all the stuff we talked about before. And he does try to, keep people calm. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. I'm not going to be so crazy. So that is the beginning. And as we go through the documents, as we go through the evidence, think about, the thesis. And we're going to come back to that. So you also have one point for evidence beyond the documents. So I'm going to go over a few things that are not in the documents, and you can think about it. So During this time, there is the Haitian Revolution, where Haiti is going to take, the American idea of anti-colonization and kick out the French. Some people call it slave rebellion. It is successful. And Napoleon is also, the United States does not support Haiti in this revolution because it's a slave rebellion. Napoleon failed to re-enslave Haiti. He's losing revenue. And during this time, we send a person basically to France to renegotiate access to New Orleans and this other stuff. And while they're there, Napoleon is basically like, you know what, I will sell the whole thing to you for $15 million. Now, there is no congressional approval to do this. We would have to go into debt to do this because essentially we haven't passed, Congress hasn't passed anything to put this in the budget. But essentially it lands in the lap of Jefferson and they agree to buy this for $15 million. Now, this is going to basically double the size of the United States. And so it does, fall into the democratic idea of, promoting agriculture because we're going to have more land. But this is where it starts to flip because the Federalists are the ones who are like, hey, this is unconstitutional. And Jefferson says, well, I got treaty powers. I can do this. So, Jefferson tries to make it legit and it ends up kind of passing in the end. And people are, glad that we have doubling the nation. I mean, why would you give up that? But if you look at the strict constructionism of it, he tries to draft an amendment that basically was supposed to retroactively make this okay. It doesn't really work. And then Congress just basically passes a legislation that gives him authority to do it. So, he kind of stretches the Constitution in order to take advantage of this great deal. Another kind of example of outside information that's not going to be in the documents is that Jefferson does reduce the national debt. He does cut the federal bureaucracy. He reduces the Army and Navy. And he, Jefferson doesn't do it, but Madison is going to be able to do it. Madison is going to let the Bank of the United States expire. So Jefferson does reduce the size of the government, does reduce debt and all of this. And so, these are two outside facts. Which one can you use? Well, I guess it depends on what you're trying to prove, but you could use both to show complexity. And just make sure if you're using an outside fact, don't just say, the Louisiana Purchase is an example, right? You're just mentioning it. What you have to do is say something like the Louisiana Purchase went against Jefferson's strict constructionism in the Constitution, but it doubled the size of the nation, right? How you use these facts depends on what point you're trying to make, but you really have to use them, not just mention them. Okay. So you also get 2 points for document use if you use 6, and I repeat, do not quote. You get basically 0 points for using a document if you quote it. So it is a waste of time to quote a document. Do not quote. So you get another point for document use for analyzing documents, saying why it says what it says. So use 6 docs, analyze 3. So for this one, you have to say purpose, historic situation, audience, what is shaping what is being said. And we're going to kind of go over a couple of these. So, if I was looking at Doc B, right, and we'll take a look at Doc B in a minute, I would maybe think about historic situation, right? Historic situation of Doc B is that we are still, caught in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars, which goes back to Washington, right? And what is starting to happen is that U.S. sailors are being kidnapped by the British, and, our stuff is being seized by the French. So this is sometimes called impressment of seamen. So essentially, the British are taking our seamen, and we need to do something about it. So an impressment is just essentially taking people, drafting sailors. All right. So the British needed sailors because they're fighting the wars. What some English people are doing is because the English Navy was terrible, was they would fly an American flag, and when someone tries to take them, they would be like, I'm American, don't draft me. And so they just start going on American ships, taking American people, and saying you're in the British Navy. Now, this makes Jefferson very mad. This is a violation of our, sovereignty. And so what he does is kind of weird. He embargoes ourselves. So Jefferson, when people are stealing our people off of ships, says, I know how I'm going to stop people from taking our sailors. We just will never leave port. So if we never leave port, no one will impress our seamen. Now, the goal is to get people to stop seizing American vessel, but what we're doing is embargoing ourselves. The GDP is going to decrease by 5%. Smuggling is widespread. You know, I hate this time period because now it's like Non-Intercourse Act and impressment of seamen. But anyway, yeah, it's not very popular because essentially what Jefferson does is he forbids trade. Now, is this strict constructionism? Does it say somewhere in the Constitution that the president can like stop all trade? No, this is crazy, right? And it makes a lot of people mad. Okay, normally in class I have to sit there for like a half an hour, but since this is a lecture, does anyone get, oh, grab me? I'm gonna give you a minute. Oh, grab me. Oh, grab me. Oh, grab me. Oh, grab me. So we have impressment of seamen, and then the oh, grab me. What is this talking about? What is an oh, grab me? Okay, let's take a look at this horrible cartoon. It shows up on every single test. You have a turtle biting, literally biting this guy on the butt. Like something is coming back to bite you on the butt. This is an American trader. And it says, oh, grab me, or the American snapping turtle. What is the oh, grab me? It is embargo backwards. Did you get it? Not that funny. Oh, grab me. So, the cursed embargo, or the cursed oh, grab me. Darn how it nicks him. This is an American trader trying to, right? These guys are like smuggling out to a British ship. This is keeping him back, right? So people are smuggling, people are complaining. Now, a lot of people think this is a negative depiction, right? But this is like an American trader. He's just like, I'm being stopped by the cursed oh, grab me. What is the point? They do not like this embargo act. This is, think about where this person is from. This is Alexander Anderson in 1808 from New York City. People in New York City are merchants. They are traders. They are not going to be excited about having Jefferson stopping them from trading with the British. So, the cursed oh, grab me, this is critical of Jefferson. It is saying it is going too far. This is not good. So, does it make sense? Okay, it is. So the point of view is against the Embargo Act. Think about New York City. Think about who this guy probably is. He's probably a Federalist. He is in New York City, which was dependent on trade. The context is the Embargo Act. Kind of mentioning any of these things will be analyzing the document and using the document. Is this an example of being revolutionary? Well, it's definitely not a strict constructionist thing, right? All right. So chunking is another idea that you have to do with your DBQ. You have to start thinking about how can I pair things together? Well, what might be a really good pairing is this graph with Doc B, because Doc B is about the Embargo Act, and I can then pair it with a graph to talk about the effects of the Embargo Act. So if I take a look at the effects of the Embargo Act is in 1808. Oh, look, it's right there. This is the Embargo Act, right? In 1808. What happens is everything is going down, right? Now, eventually what happens is it is going to go up. But this is not good. Imports or exports, everything is just falling, just crashing, right? So could I pair this with, the other one? Yeah, because you can talk about the impacts of the Embargo Act, right? You could talk about what happens. So basically Jefferson is embargoing the United States because some people are taking our seamen, and what happens to the economy? It is dropping. Our exports and imports are plummeting. This is going to really hurt people in New York City. This is going to really hurt people in New England. I guess if you're a farmer, maybe not as big of a deal, but even then it's not good. So I do want to talk about some of the other effects of the Embargo Act and these other things. Is in his annual message to Congress, Jefferson actually calls for an increase in domestic manufacturing, because if we are not importing things from other people, we have to start making our own stuff. And so short term, this Embargo Act is going to hurt the economy, but long term, Jefferson's embargo is going to actually have an unintended effect of like promoting U.S. manufacturing, which goes against his agrarian vision. So, you can think about these two things. Is it revolutionary? Well, no, because in exactly what it's doing, the thing that he didn't want to do. In his revolution, he wanted to make it into an agrarian, like limited government, and now he's stopping all trade and then starting manufacturing, right? So Madison is our next president, and he is elected in 1808. He is also a Democratic Republican, and one of the things to notice is how many people are Democratic Republican now, right? And also, as we have these new states coming in, right? As we have these new states coming in, before we have Ohio coming in, right? But we have 70% of folks are Democratic Republican. The only Federalists are really in New England, right? So this is a thing, right? Democrats are gaining power. Federalists are basically almost on their way out, and they are not going to really survive very long. So as we expand west, right, we have more power to the Democratic Republicans. So we are going to talk about the War of 1812, which is the big event of Madison's presidency. And if you wanted to bring in complexity, you could kind of analyze Washington's farewell address. If you remember, he said, steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world, try to stay neutral, and we are going to kind of violate that. So, Madison comes in. The Embargo Act is kind of a bust, does not make the Democratic Republicans look good. Our seamen are still being impressed. Our stuff, the embargo, we're starting to look weak with the embargo. More kind of war hawks are coming in, and they are like, hey, we should go to war. The other thing is that the British are giving arms to Native Americans who are starting to attack settlers in the West. So because of impressment, 10,000 Americans were impressed, right? The Embargo Act is failing. We need to seem strong. It's not politically very good to be like, we're going to embargo ourselves. It's much stronger to be like, let's go to war. And so the other thing we want to take over Canada, right? If we could take out Canada, wouldn't that be great? We would have more land, and we would get rid of our enemy on the border, and we could stop the funding of England giving arms to these like Western Native Americans. One of them is Tecumseh. So, we want to take over Canada. We want to seem strong, and we want to kind of like maintain our sovereignty and stop this impressment. These are the reasons we go to war in the War of 1812. Freedom of the seas, take out Canada, gain land, secure the nation against Native American attacks. Okay, so if you take a look at Doc C, this is a Federalist who's from New Hampshire, right? So thinking about that, and you can really use that to analyze their point of view. And what he's saying is that the draft or conscription is unconstitutional. You can't make people fight in this war. And so what's interesting about this is you now have the Federalist, who used to be a loose constructionist, now being a strict constructionist, right? Because they do not agree with the war. So what happens with this war? We don't end up taking out Canada. We try and fail. So kind of like offensively, we don't do what we want to do. We try to take over Canada and it doesn't work. Defensively, we do keep out the British, except a couple of big exceptions, which is they burn down the White House. So, we are going to defend ourselves well. We kind of see ourselves as like these like scrappy little guys like punching out, the king, another bloody nose for John Bull. We are able to, defend ourselves. We kind of think that we're winning the war because we're fighting the British. But they do burn down Washington. But then after that, we stop them in Baltimore, which is where we do the Star-Spangled Banner. In the end, the Treaty of Ghent is, we just basically say it's going to be the same as it was before the war. We basically say, okay, it's going to be the same as it was basically at the end of the Revolution. So after the Treaty of Ghent is signed, it's like status quo. It's supposed to be status quo. That being said, right, after the treaty is signed, we have the Battle of New Orleans, which news of the treaty did not reach America for several months. The British attacked New Orleans, and Jackson is going to defend it with 5,000 soldiers, African Americans, some like barefoot people from, all, you can look at all the stories. You can go watch all the things over in Chalmette. But the British are going to suffer 2,000 casualties and the Americans less than 20. It is one of these Sparta moments for the United States. Jackson is going to become a huge hero. And a lot of people wonder if it's significant. Well, we did stop them, and, now they might take us more seriously. So between the Battle of New Orleans, the War of 1812 is some people call it the Second War of Independence. It's kind of like we made Great Britain take us seriously. Now, if you look at the Canadian side of it, this is their first war of independence against America because they felt like we wanted to take them over and we didn't. I guess they're right. But anyway, we're going to get our national anthem out of this. Jackson is going to be a hero. We're going to have an economic boom after the war. People are very optimistic. We defended our borders, right? A sense of nationalism. The people who are not going to make out very well in the War of 1812 is the Federalists. They are going to really die out after the war. We have all of these western states and western migration happening, which is taking power away from New England. So in 1800, you have 46 or 60 out of Federalists and 46 Democratic Republicans. And in 1814, you have 68 Federalists and 114 Democratic Republicans. These western states, as they're being added in, and the Louisiana Purchase, it's like these tiny New England states basically have no power. And they are not popular because they're seen as not being patriotic, so they are going to die out. That being said, going back, remember that they are dying out, but they still have John Marshall in the Supreme Court, and they have a lot of these judges in their courts, in the lower courts as well. The big nail in the coffin for the Federalists is this thing called the Hartford Convention. They kind of secretly meet to limit the power of the federal government and propose a bunch of amendments. They're seen as unpatriotic, and essentially that's it. So as a political power, they are gone, but they still have people who believe in their ideals in the courts, and one of those dudes is John Marshall, right? So this is where we're going to get to the first Bank of the United States and then the beginning of the Second Bank of the United States. The first Bank of the United States is going to expire in 1811. Madison, that is a very strict constructionist thing. But after the War of 1812, we are in debt again. So what does Madison have to do? He has to make a second Bank of the United States, which looks exactly like the first Bank of the United States. And some people still do not want to have a bank. So Maryland is going to pass legislation where it tries to tax the bank. So now our guy, John Marshall, in the Supreme Court has to answer the question, did Congress have the authority to establish the bank, and did Maryland unconstitutionally interfere with congressional powers? And John Marshall, you can take a look at the document, Doc F. It's one of the things in the DBQ. I'm just going to let you read it. But essentially, what he's going to do is he's going to confirm the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution. He's going to grant these broad implied powers, and he's going to say that the national government is supreme. And so he's going to uphold the national bank, and he's going to say that Maryland cannot tax the bank. All right, so let's go back and take a look at the thesis, right? Was it revolutionary, right? So in 1800, people thought that Jefferson was going to drastically change the country. Did he, right? So we're going to work on this a little bit more, but categorize your facts. Categorize the documents. What are the facts that say it was revolutionary? What are the facts that say it wasn't revolutionary? So thinking about the idea, were the Democratic Republicans the same as the Federalists? You would put those in ones, what is different. Put those in the other. Okay. That is it. We're going to do the market revolution next. Hopefully this made sense. Take care.